both of you may have insight on this. We see at PDF and also at Open Plans, there's a community of bottom-up activity, of do-it-yourself, hackers who are making really cool sites and tools, mobile tools, like SeeClickFix, which you mentioned. And one of the questions I think people are hungry for an answer to is, and from the perspective of the city first, what are the challenges for you in embracing this sort of unofficial user-generated data and plugging it in? How can we build a better bridge so that the stuff that people are just doing on their own without permission, right, but with really good intentions, can be used in a meaningful way? Because obviously there are obstacles, and you talked about needing to do things in a responsible way. So can you give us some insight on how to build that bridge?
Building the bridge is something we're working on. Speaking about the challenges, in government there are constraints that are intended to be that ultimately result in protections to the public and ensuring that the government is operating in a responsible way. So being able to interact with, the bottom-up constituents, if you will, is something we'd be very interested in doing, and often there are constraints in contracting and how you go about if there's payment for services. The controls on payment for services are very constraining in an effort to ensure responsible use of taxpayer dollars. So those are some of the framework that we're sort of constrained by, but that's not to say that there are not ways to maintain the responsibilities that are inherent in what we do and yet still be creative in tapping into those resources. And it's some of what some of the colleagues that are here today have been charged with, is to think creatively within the constraints that we operate in, but to be able to tap those resources. So we do, IBM is a partner to the city in many respects, and they can speak as well as anyone to how procurement and contracting happens. That's not really a tenable relationship for a tech startup company who might be really nimble at creating an app, and we would love to have that nimbleness. So what we'd like to do is build a bridge somewhere between what it takes to procure services with an IBM and what it takes to enable a tech startup to come and build apps for us in a very nimble, quick and swift way, and yet respect all the integrities of spending taxpayer dollars. Challenging, but I think it's not insurmountable.
Well, I would say there's a couple challenges there. We're cities, if you think of them as big enterprises or enterprises as small cities, I think are, behind in some ways. The same problems that have been encountered in some places solved in large enterprises. For instance, there's a project called 1920-21. I don't know if you've heard of it. Richard Saul Wurman, sort of godfather of information architecture, started. His basic premise there is that we have no standard way of talking about cities. An urban planner 200 urban planners on opposite sides of the globe can't describe a city in the same way. There's no standardized nomenclature. So that's one problem. But the other is that, surely you've encountered this, there is not the robustness of licensing options, such as Creative Commons, that exist yet for data. There's been a lot of efforts in this area, but it's still very much a legal gray area and kind of hamstrings certain of the abilities of big cities to work with small providers, or even just be interoperable with data. Questions of what a modification of a data set is. For instance, is a visualization of data set a modification or not? Things like that. I think that this is a young movement. This is a few years old, and I think that we're starting to see the organizations that have developed a sort of trust or have a respect for the sort of vetting that they do of an application or of data. When there are more of those sort of intermediaries, when there are more sort of procedures for analyzing the validity or accuracy of data, I think it'll start to open up some of these collaborations. A lot of the reluctance that I see now is because of sort of a skepticism about the quality of the data that's coming in through some of these applications. But then you've got cities who ditch their 311 systems for C-Click Fix. And that's obviously not a model necessarily for New York City. But so those are the challenges as I saw them.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, for argument's sake, the city accepts user-generated data all the time, right? I mean, if I call 311 and report something, that's user-generated, and if I call 911 and report something serious, so the systems are there, it's just that they're very much designed one at a time as opposed to what a conduit like C-Click Fix can be. Maybe that's just a case of, can we accept bulk user-generated data the same way we accept it from individuals? But this gets to a sort of a larger point, and this is something that Andrew and I talk about a lot, which is whether you think we're moving, as more people understand the web as a two-way communications medium, that it's read-write, not just read. And that maybe we could begin to talk about something beyond e-government and start to call it we-government. And what we mean by that is that e-government is making sure that the city's websites are timely, accurate. If you have to download a permit or pay your taxes or pay a fine or whatever it may be, that they work really well. And the same is true for the Social Security or the IRS websites. That's a classic e-government function, which is provide information well and make it accessible and easy for people to sort of do these sorts of things that you used to have to go to an office to do. The notion there is that we now have a new way to participate and co-create something that you used to pay your government employees to do, but now maybe citizens can do together without any help from government, or maybe just with a little bit of government being the catalyst, right? For example, BART in San Francisco, last year I met the head of social media for BART, okay? And the idea of making it possible for people to adopt their subway station. And not just the way you might adopt a strip of highway, with that you put a sign up and that Midler helped clean this piece of highway, but that you're adopting your stop to help beautify it, to help keep it clean and safe, but also so that you can meet all your neighbors who, also use that same subway stop. Maybe you don't see them in real time, but virtually you are sort of part of a community. Now, cities can play the role of convening that community. That's a we-gov. This, just us starry-eyed dreamers over at PDF, or do you think that there may be some viability to this idea, and what would it take to make it more real and more robust?
I don't think it's completely starry-eyed. It's the idea, and much of what I've spoken about is the idea that this administration and this agency are embracing those principles. And I think the challenge for us is to figure out the best way to get there and how to execute it. And as I said, I don't think all the best ideas are generated from ourselves. We need to have that dialogue at forums like this and a larger community to understand how can we build that in a way that really makes sense. The mayor spoke at in the fall about ideas like this, the enabling the connected city, these kinds of principles. And one of the notions that was discussed at the time was the idea of community blogging and identifying a particular community district or community board or neighborhoods where you can have blogging, and you start to engage that, and you're marrying the government sector into a more interactive discussion about things. And so the idea behind doing that is that there is a platform. It's not pie in the sky. Those are things that we want to get to. And I think the challenge, as I said, is how to do it in a way that makes sense or is productive for generating that kind of conversation. I don't think we want to, there's a number of our city agencies that are already very active in the we government, if you will, and inviting a two-way conversation and a dialogue, and not just passive web pages or passive information. And the concept of embracing that more citywide, having a larger dialogue about that, and embracing a two-way conversation is one that is, we're there. Now you just have to see it materialize. Sometimes the toughest part is the philosophical struggle. So I'm glad to say I think the philosophical struggle we've overcome that. Now we've got to get to execution.
Great.
We government or read-write environment as I am, that there may be a lacking sort of data literacy of the citizenry, call it or an aesthetics of data, this sort of second city of information that is being built, just like the built environment. In many ways, it's being, it's part of the infrastructure, it's part of the broadband, and our environment is getting off this data. It does concern me that we may be creating, or not even realizing that it's a different kind of digital divide. It's not connectivity; it's understanding. It's sort of data grammar, or an understanding of the way that you can change a system by understanding the patterns in it and that sort of thing. In the way that someone who lives in an architecturally powerful city like New York City probably has internalized a certain sense of architectural literacy. I don't mean understanding, that this is Corinthian and that's Doric, but understanding how to navigate the interface that is the built environment. Sometimes I worry that the people like us who are building the virtual interfaces to the city are doing it wholly apart from the communities of practice that are architecting the actual built world. You look at any sidewalk, you've got people who are simultaneously navigating the built environment and a virtual environment. Usually they're facing a phone or now an iPad or something else. And those two modes of experience were designed completely separately. So I think we can change that. There are some very interesting ideas out there, but it's a discipline that doesn't really have a name. It's sort of a merger of information architecture and urban planning. And I'd like a PhD in it one day.
Wow, man. Well, you know what? We're about halfway through, and I don't want to take all the time to ask all the questions. There are a lot of really creative and active people in the audience, so I want to throw the floor open to you and just ask. We don't really have a formal process for getting online and asking questions, so just raise your hand if you have a question. I'll do my best to call on as many people as I can. Say who you are.
Openness initiative on par with or even beyond what the White House did. And I would point to the fact that lots and lots of data and basic information is not available to folks. We don't know what 311 complaints our neighbor made. We don't know if 10 million people complained about that damn pothole on the corner. We don't know a lot about things. Most city information is locked up in PDFs on websites and it's not searchable. I think you should start the kill the PDF movement and liberate the data.
Not just PDF.
But as a basic thing. And as part of an openness initiative too, there's lots of data. For instance, John mentioned land use data. Well, we have Pluto files for people who want to know. That's all the land use data on buildings and everything in New York. You have to pay $1,200 or whatever it is to get a Pluto file. That should be online. There's no reason. The city must be making a minuscule amount of money from that. The multiplier of making that free would be into billions of dollars, and you might be making under $1 million. And there are countless examples of stuff like that out there.
Well made. I think this goes toward something that I think is embraced, which is the moving bar. So for the city 10 years ago to post PDFs was, a dramatic releasing of data and information in a way that was, kind of transformative at the time. And now, and this is that, there's a treasure trove of data locked in PDFs, albeit, but out there, and that represented a tremendous step. We're now ready to take that next step. But these are baby steps for a large, complex, diverse city. What I can assure you is in terms of the commitment to openness is there. The execution can often be challenged by where the data resides and how the data has initially been stored. Not to get too technical, these are not really technical issues, and I agree with my colleague. But there are some of those challenges that abound. There are, in terms of embracing what the federal government has done, there have been discussions both within the administration and with City Council about how to set an agenda that would follow along those lines. And we will get there. There are certainly constraints in terms of privacy issues, confidentiality issues, but the things that you spoke of, that is the public's data. It should be made available, and it should be easily accessible. I think we believe